Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Chet Richards, who is our keynote speaker for this conference. A little bit about the background of why Dr. Richards, who is a mathematician, a retired Air Force colonel, is speaking at a software conference. A few years ago, I became very, very interested in the social dynamics of software teams. I think most of you have realized that through all the tools that we've gone through, object technology, pattern, structured programming, all the different generations of technology, case tools, you name it, ultimately everything that we did or influenced or was the greatest determinant of success on a software project were the people that we worked with. And I have been some of you may know that I have a secret life at UBC as a doctoral student. And for the last 5 years, I've been working on a dissertation that's looking at the social dynamics of software teams. Probably about 10 years ago, I would have been laughed out of the engineering department for proposing such research. Now, they're actually saying this is important research. Part of my literature search, part of the research, led me to a really interesting and eclectic character known as John Boyd. Some of you may also know that at one time I was a private pilot, and I'm a big aviation fanatic. And finding John Boyd was kind of the crazy psycho pilot that anyone who's a pilot wishes they were. But John Boyd was much more than just a pilot. He was also a military strategist. He had great influence on the design of the F-15, the F-16, even the A-10 and the F-22. And a lot of his thoughts he started applying to organizations, to human conflict, and eventually these got taken to business. Dr. Richards worked with Boyd since about 1975. And helped start transforming his ideas into ideas that could be applied to business. Now, a little bit about the background of Dr. Richards. He got his doctorate in mathematics in 1971. He was 30 years with the U.S. Air Force, a retired colonel. He worked in the Secretary of Defense. Apparently, he had something to do with the U.S. CIA intelligence, was it? But he's promised that none of us have to die now that we know that. Has had a very interesting career working with Northrop Grumman and Lockheed, and has been independent since 1999. He is currently working with J. Adams and Partners down in Atlanta who manage him. Basically, having someone who is able to take your phone calls for you. And he's had some experience with software. How many of you remember PL1 and Fortran? Yeah, okay. So he did some modeling, as he likes to say, some modeling that could be done easily in Excel, but was modeling some aerodynamics and maneuverability theories back then in PL1 and Fortran. And he is the author of the book, Certain to Win, which is applying Boyd's theories to business. And so I don't want to take up much more of time. I would like to introduce Dr. Chet Richards, our keynote speaker today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, after all that, I got to get my head screwed on right. I invite you all to join me here. Probably not something you're used to seeing Air Force colonels do, but if you would like, just sit quietly, close your eyes, take a deep breath, exhale, and then through your nose, just follow your breath. Feel the air come into your body. Feel it go out. If a thought comes along, just let it go. Don't take a picture. Oh. There. Do that for 45 minutes, then soon, man. about all we have time for now. Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen the foundations of agility. That's it. Anybody recognize it? Well, we'll talk a little bit more about it. There's always a few. That's true. That is the actual foundation of everything we're going to talk about here today. Although, John Boyd, who we are going to spend most of our time on, there's no sign that he ever did anything even remotely like that. What we want to talk about mainly today in this presentation that I'm modestly entitled Fundamental Secrets of the Universe is where this notion of agility came from, what it meant, and what the people who thought it up about 35 years ago, what they wanted it to do. And what I'd like you to do is kind of get you out of the software mode and over thinking about other problems like meaning of life, why some groups survive and why some groups don't. Named for a brief period of time the largest car company in the world, why they dethroned General Motors, which had 52% of the U.S. market as late as 1980. And is now struggling for survival. Toyota, with all of its trouble, certainly is not struggling for survival. And other companies that use these methods, like Honda, for example, Kia, Hyundai, are doing quite well. Why is it that so often, if you were to look at two sides and try to predict which one of them is going to win, why is it so often that you're wrong? These are the kind of questions that John was considering. Now, his approach to all of this was very interesting. As you can see there, the idea is to identify small number of concepts and then develop very, very deep understanding of those concepts. Let me explain to you a little bit about his approach. You can take the concepts that he worried about and put them into three simple categories. Remember, he was a warrior now. He was an Air Force colonel. He was concerned with the problems both of conflict in the air and on the ground. So he talked about having opponents. Not a good idea in business, by the way, to talk about opponents, because for one thing, you may end up working for them one of these days. War is a little bit different. So he talked about what you do with your opponents. He came up with a concept called operating inside the loop. Don't worry about right now what that is. We'll talk about it later. What you do with your own unit. You say improve the EFAS climate. EFAS is an acronym for 4 German words. I explain them in my book in gory detail. But basically, this is John's idea of the attributes that a climate, an organizational climate or culture needs to have so that it can operate inside its opponent's OODA loops. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. Something you want to do, and you say, well, what kind of groups can do this? And his answer was this EFAS climate, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then finally, what you do with your partners, people that wish you well, and the uncommitted, which in our line of business generally means customers and prospective customers. John was one of the first to have an overall strategic theory that included all 3 of these categories. Up until then, if you look at military strategy, it was almost always what you're going to do to the enemy, and then maybe something about how you train your own unit to do it. John added this thing, well, let's consider the rest of the world. Because stop to think about it, the real reason why Hitler lost World War II had nothing so much to do with these. It had to do with the fact that in the long run, a lot more people wanted to fight him than wanted to live under him. And as long as he was able to keep that going, as long as the West was able to keep that going, they were going to win. Armed with this deep understanding, you can, in fact you will, generate ideas that might actually work for you. So develop a deep understanding of a small set of concepts and develop that understanding so deeply that when you put yourself in your current environment, ideas for implementation, ideas for making it work occur to you. It's a very, very old idea. It's from the Denman translation of Sun Tzu. The military is out without fixed shirt. Think of that for the moment as form. The word shirt means a lot more than that, but for right now. And without lasting form. In other words, it doesn't take on a predictable reaction to events. It shapes itself like water going through cracks in order to adapt to and in fact shape the environment it finds itself in. And that's what you got to do. That's why I can't come here and give you a list of practices or a list of procedures and say if you do these you'll be executing Boyd. That's not the way it works. John Boyd's philosophy is very much a do-it-yourself operation. But like a do-it-yourself operation, I can show you how some of the tools work. I can show you some other things that have been built over the past and what they can do. But eventually you're going to have to build your own. So pull that thought as we go through this. Of course, this raises one obvious question, and that is, who cares? Who was John Boyd? John died March 1997. Probably very few of you had heard of him before then. So why do we want to work? Why do we care? Why do we spend time here worrying about ideas from a long dead Air Force fighter pilot? Well, one reason is he truly changed the way that we think about aviation. Before John, high speed in a straight line, higher, farther, faster, was what airplane design was all about. Aircraft like the F-111, the F-4 Phantom, the YF-12, were each designed to go faster than its predecessor. All three of these airplanes can reach speeds in excess of 2.5 times the speed of sound. The YF-12 probably more than 3.5 times the speed of sound. And when John came on the scene, the next Air Force fighter was going to look a lot like this. It was going to be really, really, really fast. It's only one small problem. Nobody could really explain what you're going to do out there at Mach 3.5. Other than have people go, wow, look at that. Isn't that cool? For one thing, we didn't have any weapons that would work out there. This was back in the age when a computer, if it wasn't tubes, it was actual transistors, and core storage meant just that, little cores of metal. And yes, I'm old enough to have actually seen them. And that's the kind of stuff we had back then. But the whole idea was it didn't accomplish anything useful on the battlefield. After Boyd came along, what we had was agility. Aircraft started to look like this. They started doing this kind of stuff. The F-15 did have a theoretical top speed of over Mach 2.5, but because of the drag and the way it was configured, it rarely ever went supersonic, much less even reached Mach 2. The F-16, the F-18 are both about top out about 1.5 times the speed of sound. And the F-22, actual top speed is classified, but it's for all practical purposes, it's in the same range, about between Mach 1.5 and Mach 2. But what these airplanes have are big wings. They have engines optimized to produce most of their thrust down in the high subsonic, from about maybe 550 to the low supersonic, about maybe 1,000 mile an hour range. And they have the kind of characteristics that allow them to curl themselves around the sky, just like we did. But if you look at the actual data, how fast can they go? They all look about the same. They're actually considerably slower than airplanes that were designed and flying. Well, the F-22 is early 2000s, and the previous thing, the F-4 was early 1960s, so a good 40 years earlier. So what in the world went on? And what went on was the concept of agility. As is well documented. If you're interested, by the way, in Boyd, this is by far the best biography of him that's been written by Robert Coral. He truly changed the art of war, and in many ways, even though most people aren't aware of it, he's changing the way that other competitive endeavors, including business, are carried out. There have been a number of other biographies on it. Grant Hammond's biography from 2001, The Mind of War. Grant was a professor at the Air War College. He knew John quite well. Robert Coram never met Boyd. He started the project after John died, but he had exclusive access to the family and to all of Boyd's close associates. Franz Ozinga, his name kind of got obscured here. Franz Ozinga was a Dutch fighter pilot, F-16 pilot, who got his PhD writing about Boyd, and then took his dissertation and turned it into a book, which is this one. It's deep reading. He goes quite deeply into Boyd's theory and doesn't really talk very much about Boyd himself. So it's kind of a 201 level introduction to Boyd stuff. And as far as I know, the only work that introduces Boyd's concepts to the non-military audience is Certain to Win, which was written specifically for people in business. We also talk in there a little bit about the Toyota development system and the basic problem of how do you get groups of people to work together under conditions of stress and uncertainty to achieve their objectives in the face of other groups of people. Because that's basically what war is. It's groups of people working together under conditions of stress and uncertainty, trying to accomplish their objectives, and they're being opposed in doing that by other groups of people working under conditions of uncertainty, trying to accomplish their objectives. And like John said, there are times when both of them can't accomplish their objectives. If I'm trying to invade your country, either I accomplish my objective and you don't, or vice versa. So if you get yourself into a situation where only one side can win, then the question John immediately tried to consider was, how do you make sure you're the one that wins? Is it spending? Is it size? Technology level? What is it? that allows one group of people to defeat another group of people, and in fact, do it often enough that, in the words of the Thomas Cleary translation of Sun Tzu, make them certain to win. John's legacy does live on. Don't you read this? That's Billy Mitchell, of course, World War II pilot made on Tokyo. They did, and that episode is described in all of its glorious detail in Corwin's book. But more important for us, this 30-year-old captain, he rewrote the manual for air-to-air combat. It's correct. In fact, he did it twice. The original one was his air combat, his air tactics study, which I think is available on the D&I Public. I'll give you some websites where you can download John's stuff later. And then later on with his energy maneuverability stuff. He did earn the nickname 42nd Boy, and I talked to a number of people who flew against him out at Nellis that corroborate that. The reformers went on, he was critical, as we talked about, in getting away from higher, farther, faster into things, airplanes that do strange things and actually accomplish things above the battlefield that lead to the winning of wars. When he retired, he, along with primarily colleagues in the Marine Corps, developed a concept called maneuver warfare. The former commandant of the Marine Corps, credited with the lightning victory of the first Gulf War and in the second Gulf War too, except by the time the second Gulf War, this guy retired. But General Krulak actually said, although this is current Secretary of Defense back in April, what General Krulak actually said was this: in fact, actually more than commanding just a wing or a division. A wise man is strong, and a man of knowledge adds to his strength, for by wise guidance you will wage your war, and there is victory in a multitude of counselors. Same thing, by the way, Sun Tzu said. In his Corps of Marines, I and his Corps of Marines will miss our counselor. Terrible. So there's something about this Air Force fighter. He never served a day in the Marine Corps in his life. Did serve in the Army right at the end of World War II. No time at all in the Marine Corps. Honored by the United States Marine Corps today. The Marine Corps Library in Quantico has his library, his papers, his books, and that sort of thing. And every year or so, they host a Boyd Symposium. We just held the last one back in October, about 3 weeks ago. Did anybody go to that? I'll give you more information on that. Every year, the Marine Corps holds a conference where they talk about Boyd and how his ideas continue to, primarily to advance Marine Corps doctrine. But this time, we had several people from the business world and a couple of developers, including Ray Leopold, who was one of the chief developers of the Iridium system from Motorola, came out. And there's going to be another one at Quantico, just south of D.C., next October. So if any of y'all are interested in going, I'll give you the address of my website before I leave, and I'll have information up on that. So it kind of seems, since Boyd's concepts are so closely tied to agility and maneuver warfare, it might help if we're going to develop this deep understanding. We look more deeply into the notion of agility and maneuver warfare as Boyd interpreted. Now we're getting back into the roots of the concept of agility. Now I've got to tell you a little bit about airplanes. I'm not a fighter pilot, but like Steve, I am a private pilot. I was in the Air Force for a long time. The guys who came up with this, okay, it was after Vietnam. Now in Vietnam, we had by far and away the best equipment. We had the most advanced military the world had ever seen. We dropped more tons of bombs on Vietnam than we dropped in all theaters of World War II. We had what we thought was the best doctrine at the time. Our tanks were vastly better than theirs. In fact, of course, the Viet Cong didn't have any tanks. Viet Cong didn't have any Air Force. And we had this huge logistics pipeline going in. And we had all the scientists working in the United States backing them up. Operations research, which had, of course, come out during World War II, really came into its own in Vietnam. And with all of that, we lost. How did this happen? And that was the original question that got Boyd and his cadre started. John didn't address that question, that specific question, right up front. He started with something simpler, something he knew a lot more about, and that was airplanes. And he said, well, I don't know about winning the wars, but I know about winning in air combat. Because remember, it's 42nd Boyd. He had this bet on that he could beat anybody in 40 seconds, and he never lost. And he said, that kind of in the background, how did that happen? How did I do it? What was the real, I mean, I'm not that I'm good with an airplane, but I'm not that much better than everybody else. About that same time, he discovered there were a few other people. Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote the Book of Five Rings, had 60-something combats with the sword. And I remember in Kendo, the way the samurai fought, all you really got to know about it is basically if you lose, you die. This is a big sword. The guy hacks your arm off. He comes down across. You're dead. So to win 60 of them, it means there weren't any ties. To win 60 of them is just incredible. Yeah, just absolutely incredible. You can't answer that with probabilities. You have to make the probability of winning 0.99999. Well, you work it out. Excel spreadsheets. There was a probability of winning have to be so that you'd have, well, you just have a 50% chance of winning 60. Yeah, but you don't want a 50%. So that means half the time you're going to lose. How about a 99% chance of winning 60? You see, pretty soon the numbers just become, you got more nines going on there after the decimal point than meaning. And besides, how would you know beforehand? There's got to be some other way to approach strategy. And John was familiar with Musashi. He was familiar with his own stuff. So he started evolving the concept. And the first concept he came up with, agility, still the one the Air Force used. And here's the idea. You got airplanes, that are doing this kind of stuff. He said, let's just look at an airplane. A fighter airplane, there's three things about it that are important. What direction is it going in? How fast is it going? And is it climbing or is it descending? So it's going along and it has an airspeed, altitude, and a direction. So it's a little vector we can tag onto it. Now he said, what you really want to do is to be able to change any one of those three or all three of them in any combination. I want to change my altitude, airspeed, and my direction. In other words, I want to be able to climb. That's change altitude. I want to be able to turn, change direction. I want to be able to accelerate. That's what that big engine's for. And the airplane that can do those three in any combination the best, I'm going to say it's the most maneuverable. So maneuverability, if you're a fighter airplane, is the ability to change airspeed, altitude, direction in any combination. So if I can pull 6 Gs going to the left, and your airplane is not quite as strong or as powerful, you can only pull 4, say at a given altitude, then I'm more maneuverable than you are. Worked out this whole theory called energy maneuverability, which is still taught today. The only problem with it is that it didn't always work. The F-15, for example, extremely maneuverable airplane, but in typical dogfighting air-to-air combat, the F-15 would quite often lose to the much smaller, much lighter F-16, which was not as maneuverable as the F-15. The MiG-15, more maneuverable airplane than the F-86, lost 10-1 to the F-86 in Korea. You say, well, American pilots were better trained. And they probably were. On the other hand, it was Soviet pilots flying a lot of those MiGs. And then when we got our hands on MiGs shortly after the war and were able to fly, we found the same thing. Pilots flying the F-86 beat pilots flying the MiG-15 virtually every time. And they liked the airplane a lot more. We flew off the YF-16 versus the YF-17 in 1975. The same thing, the YF-17 more maneuverable. It could pull more Gs, it could climb faster, and it could accelerate faster. But pilots overwhelmingly preferred the F-16. What was it about it? Well, when John got to talking to him, he recognized the same thing he had found his 42nd boy. The F-16 could do unpredictable stuff. It could seem to kind of flit around the sky. You'd be just about ready to close in on it and fire when it would go do something else. That's exactly the same thing he did his 42nd boy. He made his airplane do unpredictable kind of stuff that sort of threw everybody off, and while they were thrown off, he hosed them. That was his good fighter pilot term. He hosed them down. Because that's kind of how the bullets look like when they're coming out in front of the airplane. See, but it really is not so much the maneuver state, it's the ability to change that maneuver state. Say, going from pulling 6 Gs in one direction, how long does it take you to reverse and start pulling 5 Gs in another direction? How long does it take not only to accelerate, but to decelerate? Throw the guy out in front of you so that you can shoot a missile at him or open up with your cannon. And so that brought him to his first definition of agility, which is still the primary one people use, which is your ability to change your maneuver state. Stop to think about it. It's the second derivative of the flight vector of the airplane. First derivative is the maneuver vector, and the second one then would be agility. And so in 1975, early 1976, he made this. He said, we need a fighter that can both lose and gain energy more quickly. See, up until then, it had only been gain energy. That led you to these airplanes that zoom out to Mach 3.5. And John said, yeah, but in a real fight, there are times when you want to speed up. There are also times when you want to jam the brakes on, throw the guy out in front of you, make him overshoot you, that kind of thing. In other words, suggest a fighter that can pick and choose engagement opportunities. If it's not right, back off, but stay in the fight. And yet it has a fast transient characteristics that can be used either to force an overshoot or stay. In other words, everything it can do in both the positive and the negative. It can change not only where it is, and then not only where it's going, but how quickly it's transitioning from one maneuver state to another. And that turned out to be key that drove the F-16, and every fighter since then, the F-22 even more. It's a little bit technical, but you can sort of see the idea that if you're trying to chase somebody down, even if you're faster than they are, even if you can turn tighter than they are, if they can execute changes in what they're doing more quickly than you can adapt to, it's going to be very, very, very hard to bring that fight to a conclusion. Now, first thing to notice about all this is all physics, mechanics. Relatively simple mechanics in defining what it's doing. Some very, very interesting software went into this because the airplanes that could do this basically had to be flown by the first computers that we had. They were doing what's called fly-by-wire. The F-16 was the first operational fly-by-wire airplane. Germans had actually experimented with it, but they didn't have anywhere near the computer technology. The first F-16s were unstable. In a stable airplane, if you pull back on the stick and let it go, the nose comes back. In an unstable airplane, you pull back on the stick, it starts accelerating up. So you can see, you need some really, really interesting software. And it took a while to develop it. We lost a bunch of people in the test of that program. An airplane would come along and all of a sudden nose down into a 19G dive and plant itself on the ground. I think the last lawsuits on that are just being settled now. Really strange stuff. You quickly ran beyond what a human being could actually do. But the human beings that could train themselves to do it better than others were certain to win. They won every time. So, but it's all so far. This is all physics. But that's not enough, because the thing that John also remembered was what the mental state of the people that he beat when he was 42nd boy. What happened to them? Now this is kind of long. I'm going to walk you through it, but this will repay some reading. First one was from about 1975, 76. This one is from about 5 years later. Now he's got deep into land warfare. The chart actually comes from his 1987 briefing strategic game. The ability to operate at this faster tempo rhythm, in other words, do this flit around the sky bit, enables one to fold the adversary back inside himself so that he can neither appreciate nor keep up with what's going on. Again, think about it. You're trying to chase this guy down, but every time you get close, it flits away and does something else. Well, you can still turn tighter then, and maybe you can still even accelerate better. So you start catching on. All of a sudden, he throws the brakes on. He's behind you. So you put power in, you go away, you come back at him again. And you keep doing this over and over again. He will become disoriented or confused. He now being you. The one who may have theoretically better performance, but isn't as agile. Which suggests that unless that pressure is relieved, look at this, adversary will experience various combinations of uncertainty, doubt, confusion, self-deception, indecision, fear, panic, discouragement, despair. I love that kind of talk, don't you? This is terrible stuff. And John said, yeah, if it's so terrible, why leave it to chance? If you can put your opponent, and remember, we're talking war now, if you can put your opponent into this kind of condition, it doesn't make any difference what weapon he's holding in his hand, he's going to be able to use it. Which will further disorient or twist his mental images, da-da-da-da-da. Thereby thereby collapse his ability to carry on. Now, agility allows you to do this. Agility allows you to screw up the other guy's mind so badly that he's probably going to need therapy when it's all over. It's powerful, powerful, powerful force. Many examples down through history where that's happened. Some, I'm told, forms of PTSD can be traced right back. There's people getting themselves into situations on the battlefield where things were breaking so quickly they couldn't comprehend. Minds just came apart. John's last definition of agility, and the one that he presented at the 1990 DoD Agility Conference, is this: the ability to transition from one orientation state to another, or equivalently, from one OODA or maneuver state to another more rapidly than any opponent. What in the world is he talking about? It turns out this is basically the definition of agility that you guys are using. I'm sure why. This is the OODA loop. First thing to notice about the OODA loop is it's not blue. swear to God, if I see Boyd again, I'm going to kill him. This calling it a loop, first observe, then orient, then decide, then act, and then observe the results of your action, which you'll see in virtually, but not all, virtually every book on the subject, is raw. John never wrote it, even though he's quite guilty of originally explaining it that way. It just flat doesn't work. Well, and here's why. Under the O to O to D to A model, you can only act once every time you go through the loop. So if you want to act at a higher tempo, if you want to get something going and make changes more quickly, kind of stuff we usually think about as agility, then you got to speed that loop up. Which means less time to orient, less time to observe, less time to decide. Well, orientation is where the thinking takes place. So what this says is in order to act at a higher tempo, you got to dumb yourself down. But that's not the way it works. It's not the way it works. In fact, exactly the opposite of the way it works. The way that it really works is you keep your orientation better matched to reality than any of your opponents. You see reality better than your opponents. If you can do that, you will see things they miss. You can exploit those things. And until you see something that they miss, keep at it. Keep throwing stuff at it. Throw them 2 or 3 things at once, which we call principle of multiple thrusts in maneuver warfare. Leads to ambiguity. Ambiguity is great. It's the fog of war. You want to fight somebody that's really good? Throw a blanket over their head. Shoot smoke in their eyes. Throw pepper in their eyes. You know, once they're blinded, you got all kinds of things you can do. So rather than fight some big, some big guy straight up, do something to him that makes what, his weapons less useful, even useless. And in that period of time when he's trying to recover from it, go do something to him. You may or may not be decisive, may or may not be fatal, but by doing this over a period of time, you're going to have those effects that John talked about. He's going to become disoriented, confused, despair. He's going to become unsure of himself, going to become mad at himself. If it's a group of people, they'll start fighting among themselves, split up into cliques, because nobody can figure out what's going on. Think of a football team having a losing season, and the fans all get mad at each other and get mad at the coach and all that. Yeah, why leave that stuff to chance? With agility, you can create those effects. John's message. Now, the good state here just basically means that as the world is changing, your world view, your orientation, is staying up pretty well with it, better than any of your competitors. There are times when you'll want to act, primarily via this implicit guidance and control. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on. And as you're observing what's going on in the world, and you're correcting your orientation, you'll see more opportunities for action. Some of it may be probing and testing, some of it may be distracting, some of it may be decisive strokes. But see, now this way you can act as often and as quick as you want, as you're capable of, without having to only act once every cycle through the loop. You can concentrate on keeping your orientation better matched to reality than any of your opponents, and then acting when the time is right. That's the essence of movement. This allows you, by the way, to execute that jerky type of maneuver. This is what agility is really all about. Being able to do something, discombobulate the opposition, and exploit it before they can figure out what's going on. It's the true essence of agility. I'm sure the people that are here in the martial arts, this stuff must seem like what you learned when you were getting your yellow belt. So it's really amazing that it seems so strange, particularly to people that are trained in these more continuous processes. I hope I've convinced you at least a little bit that the fundamental notion of agility is the people who thought the term up back in the mid-1970s. It's an extraordinarily powerful concept, and truly is a fundamental secret of the universe. Sun Tzu said, those who really deeply understand the concept of agility don't lose. May not win all the time, but they can detect when things aren't going to reach a decision. They have the option of backing off and doing something else. This is John's main chart on why agility rules. It's pretty complicated. Chart 132, I mean, we spent a lot of time. In the 8-hour patterns briefing, you get to this chart about hour 6. And usually everybody's eyes are pretty well glazed over by then. But this kind of gets your attention. Start over here. Generate uncertainty, confusion, disorder, panic, chaos. Like what happened to Saddam Hussein's army, like what happened to the French army, May 1940. Produce paralysis and bring about collapse. if you can do this, if you can do all this stuff, then it doesn't take a military genius to win on the battlefield. Look at some of these others. Subvert, disorient, disrupt, overload, probe and test, adversary to unmask strength. Intelligence in the Bordian world is a very active process. Yeah, I study you, I learn as much as I can about you, I intercept your communications, I read your doctrine, I interrogate prisoners, all that kind of stuff. But what I'm really interested in is how are you going to react? So I'll try some things on you, and I'll observe your reactions. That's that probe and test. You say, well, yeah, but doesn't that tip the enemy off? Well, yeah, but if you do it cleverly, if you have kind of a pattern of this going on all the time so the enemy gets used to it, you can gauge his reactions, but also set him up to think that this pattern is normal, and then when you do something abnormal, freezes him in place, catches him in the headlines, and that gives you an opportunity you can exploit. It's a kind of game where all of this stuff works together. Select the initiative that is least expected. It's a key principle of maneuver warfare, a key principle of agility when applied to combat between groups of people. You see, there's several ways you can go when you're selecting an action. Your orientation is working. Most of the time, people will select the action that they calculate will be most effective. And most of the time, that's a mistake. Why? Anybody? Why is it a mistake to select the action that you predict will be most effective? Sir?
Because your opponent will make the same prediction.
Bingo. So we say in the Air Force, well, we're going to take out his command and control centers. So what does he do? He hardens them, he disperses them, he protects them, he sets up phony command and control centers for you to attack. He does all kind of stuff. If he can figure out what it is you're going to do, there's probably things he can do against it. So you see, to pick the action that's the least expected, in a sense, you've got to be able to read his mind. And the best way to be able to read the opponent's mind is to have written what's in there in the first place. And that's one of the things agility allows you to do. By constantly keeping this tempo up and injecting actions when you want them and observing their effect, you can essentially write what's inside your opponent's mind, which makes it fairly easy to read. It's known as the Cheng-Chi principle, by the way. It's absolutely fundamental to this type of competition. Of course, Cheng-Chi goes back in writing to Sun Tzu, which suggests that as an actual tactic, it goes back to time immemorial. So, extremely old. Set the guy up, get him up so that you know what he can expect, probing and testing, you understand what he's going to do, and then do something he doesn't expect. And that will discombobulate him, give you a chance to do something, and then you can start the cycle over. How do you do all that? Observe, orient, decide, act. Not necessarily in that order, but you do in all four of the processes more inconspicuously, more quickly, and with more regularity. That's how John defined operating inside the OODA loop, and that is essentially his version of agility. It's an extremely powerful concept, because here's what you want as a result of that. I think you'll all agree, not knowing any more about land combat than most of us do. But if you can do those things, it makes life a lot easier. By the way, anything with the blue, John's actual briefings, his main one, patterns of conflict, 185 charts long, using this chart for 2 hours. Now, I want to take you a little bit deeper into this. Remember, the idea is to develop a deep understanding of a small number of concepts. So let's go a little bit deeper in maneuver warfare. Now, some of you out there may be ex-military, ex-U.S. Marine Corps, Special Forces. I know Canadian Special Forces use this stuff. The U.S. Army talks about it a lot. I don't see a lot of indication they actually use it. But let's go a little bit deeper. Let's do the Battle of the Kursk Peninsula. Everybody familiar with the Battle of the Kursk Peninsula? Good. Because I won't be able to use this one again. But this was John's favorite battle. Now let's find out why. Let me take you back to Europe. Late May 1941, this was the situation. The Germans had just invaded the Balkans and then all the way down to Crete, conquered Greece. Of course, they had occupied Spain, Denmark, and Norway in 1940, France in 1940, and Spain was a nominal, well, they were friendly. They weren't technically a member of the Axis, but they were friendly. They were also smart enough to make sure that they kept all their options open. It turned out very, very useful when war ended the wrong way Germans. June 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. He's going to do what Napoleon couldn't. Let's look at it in a little bit more detail. These maps, by the way, are from one of the more famous books on the war written by one of the German generals who you'll get to meet here in just a second. The invasion of the Soviet Union was Operation Barbarossa, named for Emperor Frederick II. Barbarossa, Redbeard. It was carried out in 3 primary phases. It's kind of hard to see them here, so let me highlight them for you. With 3 objectives: Leningrad in the north, Moscow sort of in the center, and the Caucasus, Ukraine down in the south. Most of the Soviet Union's oil producing capability. The Germans, of course, no oil. He made Germany very, very little. Hitler wanted to capture those oil fields in Ukraine and the Caucasus. Also, it gave him a chance to link up with his armies down in Egypt. So, let's see what happened. Failed to take Leningrad, one of the most horrendous sieges in the history of warfare. Leningrad. Failed to take Moscow. They weren't able to besiege Moscow. They got up to close enough to get the last subway stop, and they actually were able to capture Russian metro schedules and take them back. That's as close as they got to Moscow. But they did make great progress down in the Ukraine. So let's change our focus down into the southern theater, Army Group South, and particularly the actions of the 11th Army and the Romanian Army. And their job, your job, we're going to let you all command the German 11th Army. Your job is to secure the Crimean Peninsula. So let's go back. This is the Crimea here. Black Sea surrounded, very shallow sea of Azov here. Bosphorus was down here, Istanbul, Turkey, all that kind of stuff. Turkey, Greece. So we want to drive the Soviet forces out of the Crimea. That is our objective. We want to capture the major port and fortress at Sevastopol. We want to eliminate Soviet forces that could threaten the German advance into the Caucasus. We want to open up a shortcut through the Kursk Peninsula into southern Russia. As von Manstein said, it's one of the few cases where an army was able to operate freely and independently from interference of the Supreme Command by that man Hitler. The Germans, after the war, made a cottage industry of blaming Hitler for everything that went wrong. You've got to take this with a grain of salt. So what we're saying is, this is fairly shallow. If the Germans are coming around this way, the Soviets, of course, come across into the Crimea and up into their behind. We want to make sure that didn't happen. And on the other hand, they want to be able to go the other way. They want to be able to bring their own forces across to support this operation. Now you've got the Caucasus here, which is going to limit maneuverability. Below that is Georgia, Azerbaijan is down there, Armenia is down there, and eventually Turkey. So we're going to take this whole thing right here out so that they can't come across it and so that we can go the other way. So, with that in mind, the invasion of the Crimea was a bloody mess. The Soviets were very good on defense. Something to keep in mind. Very, very, very tough, dedicated soldiers on defense, but they hadn't trained to really exploit the tools that we just saw from Boyd, maneuver warfare. It was be able to confuse them and then get your act in order so quickly you can exploit that confusion. They really weren't very good at that, although they became quite good later in the war. At this point, they really weren't very good. They were still very good on defense. It took 10 days to get this first sector right up in here. The Germans took enormous losses. Very bad for them because they really couldn't replace their losses, at least not anywhere nearly as quickly as the Soviets could. And then in waves, they occupied the rest of the peninsula. So finally, they had the whole thing, except for just a little bit right here on the end. You can see it was a big German victory. All right, here's a question for you to ponder. Where was von Manstein? If you were the general commanding all this stuff, where would you be? Now, World War I, in World War I, is back at the chateau, you know, at this big wall, you know, watching people push little toy tanks around. Where do you think von Manstein was?
Front lines.
Why?
He's got to be able to react to the enemy.
Yeah, but what can you see on the front lines?
A Junkers 52 to take you back home.
Yeah, you get the Ju-52, got the Scorch to come get you. Yeah. Your answer is exactly correct. But it's an interesting thing. What was he looking at? What did he want to see on the front lines that he couldn't see in the back? Where in the back, he's got his big map. He's got all the lines. He can see his units. He can see the Soviet units. He can see all this kind of stuff. Well, von Manstein specifically didn't stand back. He did exactly what you said. Why? What can you see on the front lines that you can't see back in your command post? Yes, ma'am?
Your people.
Yes, and specific. Let's go even a little bit deeper. Remember, the idea is here, because we're going to go deep into stuff. What are you looking for in there?
The state of your people.
Yeah.
Why they're thinking and morale.
Right, remember, this campaign took 10 days. That doesn't sound like much. Sometime when you have nothing to do, try staying awake for 10 days. And to make it even more interesting, try doing some really hard physical labor, maybe out in the dirt. Have somebody spray water on you, too, to make it even more interesting. And to make it even more interesting, let them shoot at you occasionally. Keep that up for 10 days. See, even grabbing little, pockets of rest every now and then, a few hours at this time. What von Manstein is worried about is just what she said. How long can they keep it up? And how do you do that? You get right out and you look at that lieutenant in the eyes. You look at that sergeant in the eyes. And you talk to them. They can't bullshit you. Because remember, von Manstein had been a soldier too. He knew what it was like. I mean, you don't make lateral moves into 3-star general level, colonel general level. You can work your way up. And the German army, you really worked your way up. So they're looking right in your eyes. And he's trying to, on his own, based on his own experience, decide how much longer you can keep, how much more do you have in you. Now, there's one other thing that you can see out there. What's that? People. What other people can you see out there? Yes, you can see the enemy. I can go over here and I can see Ivan, and I can do that same thing with him. I can look at the state of his equipment. I can see if his morale is holding up. When was the last time that you ate? I talked about the officers. Usually they're so, when they surrender, just a big load kind of comes off their mind. And if you catch them at the right point, give them a cigarette, a cup of coffee, they'll tell you anything. I was meant to, I noticed. And so that's what, but Manstein would do that. He'd sit down and feel just been captured. And so he's looking at his own people, he's looking at the enemy. And he's trying to gauge how much more do I have left. Now there's a subtlety in here. Also, he sees his soldiers, the soldiers see him. They see the commanding general himself, this 3-star, right up there with them. In some danger too. And they certainly don't want to let the big boss down. So they will give it that extra effort right up in front when the big boss is there. Those are 3 good reasons for commanding from the front. So leading from the front, very, very, very important principle in warfare, something you guys think of. What does it mean in business? Just toss that around. All right, the Soviets weren't beaten, however. Starting in December and going through January, I'm sorry, they counterattacked. It's something called the Stalin Offensive because it was supposed to have been planned by Stalin himself. Remember, we said you could come across the shallow sea. The Germans wanted to make sure that the Soviets didn't do that hook into the back of the Germans. Well, they tried it. And there was this big battle that was fought in the Stalin Offensive. It raged again for a couple of months. And finally, in April, it sort of settled down. Remember, we said 10 days of this stuff is really exhausting. You can imagine December through April how exhausting that was. And the Germans got reinforced by a grand total of 1 division that whole period. So what happened? We had multiple attacks by 8 to 10 Soviet divisions. And when everything settled down, the Germans had 6 of their own divisions, 5 infantry, 1 panzer, and 3 Romanian divisions, facing 19 Soviet divisions and roughly 3 brigades to division, so you could add another 2 or so. So 21, 22 Soviet divisions. And they were absolutely exhausted. When the front finally stabilized along the Perpach Gap here, this is what it was. Now, if you're von Manstein, you can say, so, I defeated all these German divisions, give me a medal. Unfortunately, your mission was not to defeat all these Russian divisions. Your mission is to clear the Crimea. You still have that mission in front of you. So yeah, you won a big victory. Yay, wow, I'm very proud of you. Now, have you accomplished your mission? Well, no. Well, I don't want to hear any more. How are you going to accomplish your mission? Well, by the way, they still have this big fortress down here in the lower left-hand corner of Sevastopol holding out. Not only do you got to get rid of these guys, but you also got to keep some forces down there to keep the Soviets from breaking out of Sevastopol. So let's review the situation. Both sides are totally exhausted. Equipment's been destroyed. A lot of people have been injured. A lot of leaders have been killed. The structure of their organization, in other words, been badly damaged. Oh, and you, because you all are getting ready to command the 11th Army here, outnumbered more than 3 to 1. This is an interesting thing. If you read military doctrine from that period up until when maneuver warfare became popular, there was a formula for how much of an advantage you had to have over the enemy before you could attack. Anybody remember what it was? 3 to 1. Goes back to Clausewitz. In order to successfully attack, a good general rule of thumb was you needed a 3 to 1 advantage over the enemy. Now, you've got to attack, and not only do you not have a 3 to 1 advantage over him, he has a 3 to 1 advantage over you. You have roughly 1/9 the force that the textbook says that you would ordinarily need in order to attack. In addition, they've got on the southern flank a big, heavy tank, anti-tank ditch, very heavily fortified, and with Soviet units behind it. Very, very strong defensive position. They have some troops all the way back to Kursk, so even if you break through the front line, there's people that you've got to contend with. And your allies, like the Soviets, good on defense, not so swift on offense. Okay on defense, particularly if they have German units stiffly below. So, what do? What I'd like you guys to do, take about 5 minutes here. I don't care, individual or groups or whatever, and then I'd like a couple of volunteers to tell me what your strategy as commander of the 11th Army is going to be in order to clear the Crimean Peninsula Soviet troops. So take about 5 minutes, take a break if you want, whatever, get together in groups if you want. Google. And then I'd like I won't know. Oh yeah, see, think about it. There's only one method that works. That's what punch inside says. I will know very Wartime is every minute ahead of the enemy is an advantage. One of the German generals said, all right, yeah, volunteer. Now, ordinarily what I do is we'd have like about 8 teams, and each team would have to brief its solution. But since we don't have that much time this time, let me just ask for volunteers. One here? All right, what would you do?
I would retreat a little bit
Okay.
because I don't want to go in
All right.
there. Like, why should I go into your stronghold and fight you? I can't even get across whatever.
Okay,
that
and
you
I
have.
think that
I would kind of like retreat a little bit and draw you out and fight where I choose to fight.
very, very, very good strategy. It's been used, of course, down through history. It was one Genghis Khan and the Mongols used all the time. They call it the ox-horn strategy. Used by the Carthaginians at Cannae to defeat a Roman army roughly twice their size. So it's a very good tactic. It's been used a number of times. But that's, nobody's ever proposed that one before for this battle. So that's very interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
We
It
can't
might
hear
work.
what the solutions were.
Okay, the one that he came up with is, what he would do is he would try to act like he's retreating, pull back to try to get the Soviet forces to come out of their fortified positions and follow, thinking that they had won. You can even start a little action up here, and then on a pre-planned notice you can pull back. Almost invariably, in that case, the enemy will follow you. And you can use that fact then to ambush them from the sides. Which I say it's a very well-known strategy. Goes back to the history of war. Probably the most famous use of it in military history was a battle called Cannae, where Hannibal defeated a Roman army. Probably wasn't twice this size, a good 50% bigger than him, using this exact same strategy. Greeks used a similar strategy at Marathon, and it was the primary tactic of the Mongols that Genghis Khan used in the 1200s. So, very interesting strategy. I don't know, it might have worked. It might have worked. The con here is probably the Soviets were so tired and so bad on offense, it's not really clear that they would have followed. But it's definitely a possibility. It's the first time I've heard that one offered. Thank you. Somebody over here, yeah.
Send some guys the other way around and attack them from the back as a short-term, high technical debt solution.
If you could get enough forces back there, something like that might well work. The disadvantage of that is it's a peninsula. So one of the things, if you're defending a peninsula, is you're always worried about landings. The Incheon landing, for example, of General MacArthur during the Korean War. But right, don't attack them in the front. Go someplace where they're weak and attack the weaknesses. It's a classic principle of warfare, so attack the enemy weaknesses. Can we have one from over here somewhere? Somebody want to throw out a solution? Lord, how are we ever going to get recruits for our war college? I'll be right back. Okay, go ahead.
We thought that if they're expecting us to use our tanks on that southern part, they possibly wouldn't be expecting us to not use our tanks there. So drive through there with the infantry, leave the tanks behind.
Very, very interesting. Hold that thought for just a minute. Yes, ma'am.
We were thinking, let Sevastopol take a stronger hold, create a diversion down there, and then your 19th division, 19 divisions, no, down the,
Down here?
no.
The
I'm not saying it right, yeah.
Oh, down to Sebastopol. Oh,
Create a
attack
diversion
Sebastopol.
down
Yeah.
there, and then the 19 divisions might have confidence to come through and be ready for them.
You know, that he actually considered that. He doesn't talk about it very much in his book. That's a reasonable strategy, too. Go take out, leave a holding force here, go down, take Sebastopol. That way you don't have to leave forces down there guarding Sebastopol. Then take your whole force back up here. Hopefully, with any luck, the Soviets will have come out of their hard defensive position at that time and tried to maneuver. And once they do that, the Germans just have a huge advantage. Those are all very good. Those are all very good solutions. Alternative history. Who knows where they would have worked? I like the way that y'all are thinking about. You know, don't just do the obvious. Try to do some kind of setting up maneuvers. And if you get them to kind of react to them, then exploit them. That is the essence of agility. That is the essence of maneuver warfare. Let me show you what from Manstein actually. What he did. He launched foiling attacks against the salient up here. Well, Manstein was the guy who had planned the Blitzkrieg in 1940. In 1940, what he did was he attacked through the weak point here and hooked up back around and trapped British and French forces. is actually the mirror image of this. But Manstein was very suspicious about this big salient just sitting out there, kind of with the big hit me written on it. So he said, you know, that must be where they want me to attack. So what he did was he played along with their plans. Sun Tzu says, accord deceptively with the intentions of the enemy. And then he attacked right through, very much like you guys said, he attacked right through the heaviest part of the Soviet defenses. He took pretty high losses, but it was for a short period of time. But he did punch through. He went through in multiple thrusts, 3 thrusts. By the way, I've drawn his arrows here, but what you should really be thinking is small groups of men on the ground picking their way under heavy fire and using any kind of terrain that they could to work their way forward, whereupon they would use their flamethrowers, their small machine guns, hand grenades to take out the Soviet defenses. Some of them made it, some of them didn't. The ones that made it got in behind and helped collapse the rest of the Soviet defenses. It was kind of, again, that idea of water seeping into the cracks and eventually crumbling the defenses. Only here the eventually was about a day. Pretty heavy fighting, but he did it. He also, as was suggested here, threw a little amphibious attack around the side just to stir things up. Why did he do that? Well, here are his own words. We intended to make our decisive thrust not in the area where the front protruded, but down in the southern sector where the enemy would be at least expecting it. But Manstein's reading of the Soviets, and it was correct in this case, is they had put this trap out for him. If he looked like he had taken the bait with the spoiling attack up there, they would be expecting the main attack in the north, therefore undoubtedly had prepared for it. Didn't know exactly what their preparations were, but he knew they had prepared for it. So hit them where they're not expecting it. And in the resulting confusion, break through before they can figure out what's going on, and then exploit the resulting confusion. And you can see it just says here, one of his top divisions, the German infantry division, would have to stay up north and continue to deceive the enemy. Then on the second day, he hooked well behind the Soviets, avoiding whatever they had set up here. He was going to try to replay the blitzkrieg. He actually came back a little further east maybe than I had here. And then he launched this brigade group. Colonel Gurdick was killed in it, but hey, fortunes of war. And their only job was to get back here to the back to make sure this reserve line didn't harden before and set up before Manstein could penetrate. And they did. They just raised hell. Did a really, really good job. Then, with his remaining forces, he shot through the now confused, demoralized, disoriented Soviet formations and made a beeline for Kursk. And took it about 2 days later. Cleared the Kursk Peninsula. Oh, and by the way, then he turned all of his forces and took Sebastopol. And for this, he was awarded his 4-star and made a field marshal. Why did he do it this way? Well, if you're outnumbered 3 to 1, you've got 1/9 the forces that the textbook tells you. Then you're going to have to play with the enemy's mind. You obviously can't play with it physically. You got to play with the enemy's mind. And he used a classic deception operation. Cheng-Chi, the expected operation up in the north, the unexpected through the heart of the defenses. And by the way, attacking the heart of their defenses is almost always unexpected. Alexander the Great, every battle he ever fought, basically used that same tactic. So if you can figure out where the enemy is strong, and if you can figure out a way to take him out, then typically the moral effect you have on the rest of the army is also pretty strong. This is considered the classic example of maneuver warfare from World War II. Still studying the textbooks. It was by far and away Boyd's favorite example. He got a chance in 1980 to interview some of the generals under von Manstein who had participated in the campaign. And even today, they speak of it in terms of awe. So what Boyd said, what distinguishes this form of conflict from the side where we just get out and slug it out on the battlefield, or we deliberately do these sorts of things. So he's thinking now about the mental side. He's thinking about how do I attack the other side's not only ability to fight, but his will to fight. How do I make sure that no matter what tools remain in his hands, he can't use them? And fast transient maneuvers, that abrupt shift from one maneuver state to another. Exactly as in the airplanes, remember, where they abruptly went from going 9 Gs in one direction to 6 Gs in another. And that's Boyd's generalization now of this jerky movement of airplanes. Say, well, what does that have to do with armies? Here's how John generalized. Let me give you something a little more pertinent. Get away from warfare. This is from a former student of mine who is an R&D manager for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. I'll give you his name here in a second. The rate of acceleration in scientific improvement was, after the course, I thought 2 to 4 times improvement was pretty good. Because I told him, I said, don't worry about 25% stuff. Let's at least see about doubling your improvement. And he said, wow, that would be great if you could. He said, no, not so much. I'm thinking at least an order of magnitude, if not 2 orders of magnitude, should be our target for improvement. Observations of our best team suggest that you really can't make measurements like that don't really have any meaning. I was able to integrate external scientific findings 1,000 times faster, do it in minutes rather than weeks, and reset direction at the same rate. Now imagine whose team, whose redirect speed is about half an hour versus formally 2 weeks to a month. So in other words, he's now getting, his best teams, he's getting the same result in a fraction of an hour that it used to take a month to get. And that's the kind of improvement that he got by studying the same, he had the same briefing you're getting. Of course, we had 4 days out before we went through it all. And then he came up over a period of about 3 years to evolve techniques for getting this kind of improvement. For examples of the same phenomenon, agility. Extremely powerful concept of war, in one-on-one conflict in the air, and in at least the development of the pharmaceutical industry. So we're seeing the same phenomenon pop up now in many widely separated areas of human endeavor. So the question comes, okay, what are they doing that's so different? Go back to the OODA loop model. This is what Terry used to his pharmaceutical industry. When you stop there, what do you really need to make it work? Well, you can start anywhere. You start with action. Because if you don't, action's where you explicitly interact with the external world. If you don't have any action, then you're just doing navel gazing up in here. Maybe fun, probably isn't going to do a lot for you. So what you need is a repertoire of actions, the things that you can do. You need your orientation, better matched to reality than any of your opponents. You need some method then to say, okay, I understand this is what's going on, and I've got these things I can do. What do I actually do? And then you need a functioning implicit guide and control to make it work. A lot to talk about, again, and certainly when I talk about it a lot more. But basically, if you think about it that way, you're developing actions, you're keeping orientation, better matched to reality. You're coming up with ways so that you can very quickly make decisions about what to do. By the way, don't be tossed about this decision thing here. Boy, got this one wrong. Decisions are made here for the most part and flow across this link. Implicit guidance and control, which Boyd got right. That part. Boyd was a military officer, though, and he really wanted to see orders, even if they're verbal orders, very quickly given. So he really liked that explicit decision, even though when he was writing it down for other people, he said you really should be implicit. Most of the time, you should communicate implicitly because it's much faster than writing everything down. And if you put all that together, then you can make Boyd's thing work. So you need orientation, closely matched to reality, a repertoire of potentially effective actions. You need Fingerspitzengefühl. That's the F in EFAS. Nice German word. Fingertip feeling. It just means knowing it so well that when outsiders watch you do it, it looks like magic. You may be doing some analysis. We're doing a lot of analysis, but it's done very, very quickly. You just kind of know what to do. We'll look at that more in a minute. And then you need a way to link all this together, which is this implicit guidance and control. I know right now it doesn't mean a lot to y'all, but it's all there, and it's all stuff that you can think about, and it's been proven to work over and over and over again. So how do y'all do it? Figured I come from the South. That depends to a large degree on your very specific. I can't give you a formula because any formula would have to depend on your specific problem, your specific people, your specific organization. So, bad news here is you're going to have to do it. You have to do it yourself. In particular, Don't be a member of any school. It's one of, I think, John's most useful sayings. Build your own snowmobile. The snowmobile was John's metaphor for a synthesis. Because remember, you take a handlebar off of whatever it was, a tractor, your treads off of a tractor, and an engine off of a ATV, and put it all together, and you get something you didn't have before. You get a snowmobile. Skis, ski. All the components were there before, but by putting them together, you solve a new and unique problem. That became his metaphor for creative synthesis. Now, raises this interesting question. We said you want to develop a deep understanding of a set of small principles. A few minutes I have left here, which is not very many because we're going to have to break this short. The question arises, what are the principles? Well, this was one of Boyd's list of fundamental principles. And I don't want to go through them other than just point out that most of them really apply to war, although some of them probably apply to most any. Amplify our spirit, strength, and command away the adversaries. Gets out of what we're talking about. How do you know? In a really difficult project, how do you know that you're making progress on it? And what I would like to do here is, I'm going to skip this exercise for a moment. We don't have time. In fact, I only have a couple minutes left. Lots of people have come up with lists over the years. Here's Deming's system of profound knowledge. It's really great. It's fantastic. The problem with it is it's not clear that mortals are going to be able to develop a really deep understanding of 15 principles in the time allotted to the rest of us. The list doesn't have to be long in order to be effective. So if your list isn't working for you, adding more principles to the list may not be what you really need to do. You may need to step back and decide if you need to phrase things a different way or take some of them off or do something different. A very effective list of one principle. This is the table of contents from good to great. Now here's an interesting thought. See, as you start digging into this, you find all kinds of new stuff. You start to develop a deep understanding. Right decisions, actions, become self-evident once you have your orientation well matched to reality. And say, I'm paraphrasing Collins in terms of voice. All right. This is Collins' famous hedgehog. And he says each one of these you can spend several years before you come up with a deep enough understanding to do you any good. And the hedgehog concept then says, once you get all of this, put your schwerpunkt, the S and E, in here. And just don't do anything that lies outside. Very, very, very powerful concept. Yeah, you can spend quite a bit of time coming up with these things here. They look so simple, but like he points out, if you don't really develop a deep understanding of it, you can come up with concepts in there that just don't work. So you have to really, really stop and think about it. So, here's some things you can do if you want to apply this. You say think deeply. Well, do that. Don't accept anything. Are you really confronting, if I'm on your board of directors, can you convince me that you're really confronting the brutal facts? Can you convince me that your orientation is better than that of any of our competitors? Can you actually convince me that I'll give you more money because you have a better understanding of the situation? How can you tell if things are beginning to get out of hand? Can you really show that everybody on your team shares your vision? Or are you being told what they think that you want to hear? Can you convince me as a member of the board of directors that you're not drinking your own bathwater? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to say these are the principles of Toyota Way. Yeah, really, really good stuff. You can develop a deep understanding of them. Of course, a lot of them really only apply to production. Others, make decisions slowly and by computer. How do you actually do NEMA washing? How do you set your organization up so that you can do it? Again, you can do that. But you got to think. You got to work, you got to experiment, you got to try, you got to practice. Let's see where we are now. I'll show you this. This is from Patterns of Conflict. Here's a list from Boyd that isn't all war. So this is a list might do you some good. Let me point out one thing, harmony. Usually we think of harmony as everybody's working together and smiling and scratching each other's backs. Boyd's definition of harmony is basically the Buddhist principle of non-duality. Breaking trade-offs. maneuver warfare actually breaks long-standing trade-offs in the theory of war. Toyota production system broke the trade-off between cost, quality, and production time. Remember, under the way you usually build things, this may apply to your business too, you could only improve quality by increasing the cost and dragging out the production time, because you improve quality through inspection and through rework. What Toyota does, and any other system based on the principles of the Toyota production system, which are incidentally the principles of maneuver warfare and agility, just applied a little bit differently. They thought deeply for 25 years before they kind of got that system right. That allows you to increase quality, improve your quality, and lower your cost and decrease your production span all simultaneously. Something that you can mathematically prove is impossible. And the way that we were building stuff up until about the mid-1900s. Anyway, lots and lots of good stuff. Almost through here. Oh, the most fundamental secret of the universe, guys. It's a do-it-yourself project. It's only going to be successful if you do what you say. You come up with your own list of principles that you think are important. You develop your own deep understanding of them. And then based on that, the deep understanding of the principles and your own deep understanding of your specific line of business, specific business situation, they'll meld together and ideas for implementation will arise, which can then be tested and refined. Don't be a member of any school. Definitely includes don't be a Boydian. Of course, since Boyd told you not to be a Boydian, I'm going to show what I mean by this. My last one. Georgia played Florida football last Saturday, and the outcome was the way it always is when Georgia plays Florida. Florida won. This is from the Atlanta paper, very close to the University of Georgia. Say what you will about Urban Meyer. That man could coach. In Jacksonville, he's a demonstrably lesser team, and Meyer tried everything. Meyer was building snowmobiles on the field. Something didn't work, they got together, they came up with something else. Constantly changing their tactics, constantly trying to keep Georgia off balance. So, like von Manstein, he had the weaker side. He ramped up his agility, and he won. By the end of the game, it was almost pathetic. Georgia team was just out of ideas. Out of airspeed, altitude, and ideas. That's all the time that I have, guys. I appreciate your listening to me. I hope I've convinced you a little bit about the fundamental power of this agility concept. It goes back a long way, and people have used it to win wars, to design airplanes, to create mighty industrial enterprises, such as Toyota, and now Ford, by the way. Alan Mulally is very aware of these principles. And I think there's a lot there that can work for you all, too. Just remember, deep understanding of a small set of principles and applications will arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We spent ample amount of time on Crimea today. Thank you for this, Chet. And we discussed so many reasons why it was so difficult for Germans to capture the peninsula. Sorry, Chet, all wrong reasons. There's one real reason. No one knows it. I do. I will share it with you. It's highly privileged information, beware. The reason is that Crimea has a fantastic climate, and they can produce absolutely unique, legendary wines. Ask Her Majesty, she knows. So, as long as you are in possession of these wineries, you are unbeatable. Remember, Russians tried to invade, to grab the peninsula from the east. Why it was difficult for them? Because Nazis now were in possession of these wineries. No, there is only one winery in Okanagan, which, by the way, has climate very close to what we had in Crimea. There is only one winery that produces wines that come as close to legendary Crimea wines as you can get on this continent. You can get these wines from anywhere in Vancouver. You have to get it from the winery if you're lucky, because they sold out very quickly. And this is the wine. This is that wine that connoisseurs from Crimea cannot, it's very difficult for them to kind of understand that it's not Crimea line. This is our little token of appreciation. Thank you, Chet. Thank you very much.